G'day, welcome to Lunch Money. My name's Nick Samios. Thanks for joining us today, whether or not you're joining us live or on our podcast, or maybe watching us a bit later on YouTube. We've got a great lineup today. Some of you might be working from home, but imagine working from inside a hot tank of sulphuric acid. That's what some people are doing today. We're going to be looking at mining services in WA, and then we're going to come back over east and look at a little bit of corporate restructuring. And we're going to look at some of the news today. I'm going to start off with introducing our first guest, who is Dave Osman from APMS. G'day, Dave. How are you going?
Good, Nick. Yourself?
Fantastic. So, Dave, I guess your business does a couple of things. You're obviously in the business of acid tanks and processing, but you also do manufacturing as well. What's been keeping you busy, sort of since this COVID struck? What's been keeping you guys busy?
I guess we've had a fair few shutdowns that have been postponed. But earlier on in the year, from sort of March, April, May, and then they've been rescheduled to later on in the year. We're trying to sort of start doing shutdowns again around August, September, October, November. So it's been quite busy rescheduling them and dealing with clients to, I guess, get some dates and work out when the borders are going to be open to be able to travel and do that sort of work. Yeah. Some of our work is, or a fair chunk of our work is overseas as well. So that's been another challenge to also deal with those clients and see when we can actually get across to do their plants. We're pretty fortunate the fact that there's not many, I guess, around the world that do the sulphuric acid work. So
we just run a bit of a video of what some of your guys do, some of the specialist work that you do. Now, and just explain to us, so this is your guys going into a hot tank of sulphuric acid?
Yeah, so that's the sulphuric acid processing tower. So we go in and do a video inspection of the acid flowing around in that circuit. So that's 98% sulphuric acid.
So you're not going in there and you short some times?
No, not. They used to, maybe 30 years ago. But yeah, so we go in there and test the flow, and we feed that video back to our clients so that they can see the inside of the towers, which is something they don't generally get to see.
Now, I was talking to you the other day, and you were saying that some of you, it's obviously highly specialised work that you do there. It's not just a matter of putting on a spacesuit and getting in. It's highly specialised work. And if any competition that you have tends to come from overseas, but of course those guys can't fly in at the moment.
Yeah, that's correct. We're actually quite, I guess there's been some instances where shutdowns have been, or maintenance has been delayed, but on the other hand, we had a client we haven't worked for previously give us a call, and they generally get an American company out to do the work, and we were able to mobilise to give them a hand within sort of 24 hours. We had a sea container with our equipment on a truck, and we were able to mobilise up to sort of midwest of WA. So it was actually, there is some positives out of it, but it's certainly been challenging, that's for sure.
Yeah, but okay. Now, I guess looking at your background, I mean, you've been running this business. I mean, you're obviously the principal at APMS, and you've been running that business for 11 or 12 years.
Yeah.
And you learnt your trade basically in the Navy.
Yeah, I did join the Navy in '83 as a 16-year-old. Left home and went out into the wide world. Yeah, it was good. I joined as a junior recruit over in Fremantle, and did my 9 months over there, and then did trade training in Melbourne and Sydney.
I mean, one of the things
back in Perth.
Right. I mean, I know that. I mean, the detail of planning that goes into your operations when you're doing one of these mining shutdowns. I mean, they're very precise. It is like a military mobilisation, isn't it? You're flying guys there, and all the supply.
Training the guys, making sure all the guys are trained to the right standards and competencies, the equipment, the suits that you see in that video. They're inspected nearly every time we use them. So there's a lot. The guys are really sort of going in there and potentially putting their life at risk. I mean, they're going into a sulphuric acid tower, and by the time they come out, that suit is literally covered in sulphuric acid sludge or liquid, and then there's a cleaning process on the way out that is sometimes just as risky, because the guys sitting on the outside are still dealing with sulphuric acid and other nasty chemicals. So yeah, there's a lot of training and high level of competency that goes into it. That's for sure. I guess that's why there's not everyone off the street does it.
Yeah, look, I mean, we won't go into it now, but I understand that, it takes a special kind of person. Is it, well, I had one of your guys once explain it to me. What's that movie where the crazy guys going into space? They're a little bit like astronauts, aren't they?
Yeah, it's actually
it's a bit of an adventure thing.
Yeah, it's actually quite funny when you get someone new and you're training them to go into a suit, and when you're zipping up the suit for the first time and you see the look on their face. Yeah. You're actually encapsulating them into a potentially it could be a body bag, and you know you're sort of closing the zip, and they're on their breathing air, and you can see instantly whether they're going to make it as a sulphuric acid technician or not.
Well, they could end up like Sylvester the cat in a cartoon, couldn't it? We'll just put you on hold for a sec, Dave, and we'll just introduce our next guest, Mark Robinson, who coincidentally was actually in the Navy at the same time as Dave. You guys were never on the same ship, though, I don't think.
That's right, Nick. I started in 1983, but I started on the eastern seaboard at HMAS Creswell at Jarvis Bay.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember when we first met, Mark. It was a long, long time ago. But I must admit that I don't know, somehow I knew about your naval background. I don't know how it came up. But, you did seem to be very cool. And I don't know, there was a certain calm about you, and a certain, you were very methodical as well. I don't know if that's a sort of a naval training that comes into the practice of insolvency and corporate restructuring.
Yeah, Nick, I know where you're headed. It's a very structured environment, and so that's got a lot of application. In my career in the Navy, I was a project manager, so I also did master's degree sort of studies in that area, which was with the then new submarine project. So, that sort of methodology has a lot of application particularly in complex, fast-moving insolvencies.
We had, I don't know if you saw a couple of weeks ago, we had the CEO of an IPO called Intellicare, and he had been in the RAAF, and he certainly said that he learnt how to stay pretty calm under pressure over there. Tell me, so as an insolvency and corporate restructuring person, what's been keeping you busy this past week?
Two things in respect of some trading of some companies through to a sale. And they're basically what I'd categorise as pre-COVID sort of restructurings through to sales of parts of their businesses. And then I guess the second limb is prepping some companies for when in September, the fiscal taps turned off, and those that are capable of surviving, are putting an appropriate plan in place.
My brother refers to the before COVID time as it's the before time, like in Mad Max Thunderdome. The children tell the story of the before time, which is quite funny. And what sort of businesses have you been involved in, just out of curiosity?
I'll look retail predominantly, but then also interestingly a software development company, and notwithstanding COVID restrictions, we sold some IP for a very significant sum in that environment, and I think it was attractive from the point of view that everything that can go onto a platform or be digitised, that's the way business is going, and this particular business sort of hit that sweet spot.
Mm. Yeah, look, it's interesting. I mean, again, with this IPO that we were looking at a couple of weeks ago, they're providing certain technology, and life's going to change. It's interesting. You talk about businesses getting ready for September. I guess when all the training wheels that the government's been providing come off. I mean, do you think it will be September?
I'll look. That's an interesting call. I understand government in June is going to sort of come together and see what's transpired so far. I think there'll be probably a tweak in both directions. A tweak for those companies that seem to be travelling relatively well through this period. They might be weaned off the support packages earlier, and then those that have really suffered, let's say in hospitality and retail, maybe there might be an extension beyond September for those particularly affected industries.
Have you looked at any hospitality businesses of late?
Not personally. Certainly, preliminary calls, but not in detail.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, look, on that note, we'll just introduce our next guest, Sarina Jackson, who is a lawyer at Douros Jackson. G'day, Sarina. How are you going?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. We'll get onto the sort of legal side of your life, but you're also a part-time restaurateur.
A great time to be that, isn't it? Yes, I'm definitely part-time at the moment. Got a small restaurant in just around the corner from your place in Alexandria, and hit hard by COVID. Very interesting being in hospitality during this period of time with the shutdown.
And you're also involved in wine a little bit?
Yes, mostly drinking it these days, but selling it just out of the office in my legal office, just selling wine with a small liquor license to friends and things like that. So
yeah. I had forgotten about that because I know we had Peter McAtamaney from the wine industry last week, and I wondered why you'd sort of volunteered to be on that week. But of course, then the penny dropped. And what about? I guess you're involved. You've got clients in banking and finance. What? And obviously, you're involved in insolvency and all sorts of stuff. What's been mainly keeping you busy the last couple of weeks?
It's funny that the key areas, I suppose, have been property. So we act for quite a few landlords in regards to the rental incentives or the rebates and the deferrals of the commercial property. We also have quite a large mortgage practice, which is actually not seen much change. So a lot of people were very worried about COVID and what that would have on the residential property market, but we've seen that not drop off. We've actually seen it slightly increase from where it was from the beginning of the year, which is interesting. And also, there's a lot of clients at the moment interested in the JobKeeper. So whether now that they're in the system, can they get out of it? What happens if they're not quite giving the right figures to the government, that kind of thing. And then what happens if they don't match up in the next BAS, for example? Do they have to give the money back? That sort of thing. So there's a lot of questions around where it can go wrong with JobKeeper.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. And I mean, do you have any sort of sense as to when do you speculate that JobKeeper might come to an end? Do you think it'll come to an end as scheduled, or?
I think there's Mark's probably right in I think it's going to be a bit of tweaking for some people. It's going to be extended, and I think it's going to be shortened for some people. I mean, you look at tourism and hospitality, and if Queensland keep their borders closed, there's going to be businesses up in Queensland who are going to need assistance far beyond September. So whereas New South Wales is obviously opening up their borders next week or into internal travel. So I think it's going to be very dependent upon how the states open up.
And what about on the sort of restructuring and insolvency side of things? I guess a lot, because the government's practically put the whole economy into safe harbour. A lot. There's been, apart from Virgin, I guess there's not really been a lot of activity. I did notice some wind up. I noticed some companies being wound up this week. I don't understand how that works, given the way things are.
That started pre, so that those proceedings were done pre the legislation. Effectively the safe harbour. Another one that went, G-Star went this week, didn't it?
Right.
G-Star went into administration. Restructuring.
Is that the transport company?
No, the jeans.
Oh, jeans. Okay.
Yeah. But insolvency has been quite quiet. I think the government effectively just put a lid on it and said, we'll deal with it in the back half of the year. So I think it's going to get very busy come September onwards.
All right. Well, look, on that note, we might just get everybody together, and fantastic. Okay, we'll take a look at a few news headlines in a minute. I guess, Sarina and Mark, I guess in your line of work, you don't quite get the excitement that Dave has the opportunity to climb into acid tanks and that sort of stuff.
I'm not sure I want to either, to be honest.
I mean, mining services is one of those industries, I guess, that we're sort of clinging to and hoping to help kick the economy along. Well, I guess we'll talk about that in a minute, actually. But we will take a look at our news headlines. Let's have a look at what some of the things that have been making it in the news this week. Now, this first one is good old Gonski in the Fin Review. It might have been in the Australian, saying that Australia's got to rethink its industries, and one of the things he's talking about is manufacturing. Everyone's talking about we've got to bring back manufacturing because we've learned a lesson in being reliant on China, etc. I mean, Dave, part of what you do, I mean, you obviously do the cleaning up shutdowns and what have you. We also do a fair bit of manufacturing yourself. I mean, how do we turn manufacturing back on in this country? I mean, how do you see it as a manufacturer?
Oh, look, I think, I mean, we've got a small, in comparison, we've got a very small workshop in Henderson in WA, and I think there's some things that are capable of being manufactured in Australia, and some things that we've just lost that ability, or we're just too expensive to fabricate in Australia. It's unfortunate, and I'm not sure how. I'm sure there's a lot of items that could be manufactured in Australia that the government's looking at now, and that, I guess one of them is medical supplies that we fell short of right at the start of the COVID. So things like that, we could definitely, I think there's industries there that are already set up, but maybe we look at industries that are running in Australia and try and help them along to be a bit more competitive, and
so Scott Morrison,
generate it that way.
Imagine Scott Morrison and Gonski turn up at Henderson knocking on your door, and they go, Dave, you can have 3 wishes to sort of crank up manufacturing. What do you think they would need to be? I mean, is it depreciation on equipment? Is it tax incentives? I mean, what is it? Labour?
It's labour and availability. So if a couple of visits to China and their workshops, and the workshops from a steel manufacturing perspective, structural steel, pressure vessels, things like that, their workshops are just absolutely massive. It's just to walk into them and see the area that they've got, and they can put these workshops together at a very, very low cost, and the cost of the labour is very, very low. So we just, I don't think we can match that from an Australian perspective. But on the other side of that, when we do fabricate or manufacture stuff in Australia, it's a high quality. So we've got to look at what we're prepared to pay for, I guess, at the end of the day. Is we do make things very well in Australia, and that's a high quality. So people have got to be prepared to pay for it.
Well, maybe Australian manufacturing needs to be like the special forces, as opposed to sort of the general army. Okay, well, any thoughts there, Sarina or Mark? On
just one point. We're going to open up factories again. We'd need new equipment, and most of that equipment is made in China. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure where the chicken and the egg comes from, and how we start it all back up again.
I think the answer more lies in we've got too many eggs in one basket, being China, and expanding those relationships with India and Indonesia and North America and Britain and Europe is probably more where the answer lies.
Okay, all right. We might go to the next headline. This is an interesting one, actually, that I'm going to throw Sarina under the bus on. So this is interesting. This is an article about negative interest rates. I mean, as governments around the world are printing money in order to keep their economies afloat, there is downward pressure on interest rates. And even before COVID came along, there was negative interest rates in some parts of the world. And people are saying, they're wondering if this is like a Y2K situation where banks are looking at their documents and saying, well, if interest rates do go negative, do they suddenly have to start paying their customers to borrow money off them? Can you imagine? Have you heard about this, Sarina? Or
I've read a little bit about it because Europe and America are obviously a possibility in heading that way. But I think what you'll get is in Australia in particular, is some very fast amendments to documentation and some very fast court appearances before judges trying to get rulings on the fact that they don't need to pay out on negative interest rate. It sort of goes against the common sense that a bank's going to do that. So I don't think it's ever going to get there. But under the documentation at the moment that most banks have, it is certainly not ruled out, because it's not explicitly reserved as if it's not going to happen. But so it's a very unknown area.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I guess if Yeah, it is interesting. Anyway, look, we won't bog into that too much. Okay, our next news item is on iron ore. Yeah, so this is out of today's paper. Iron ore back up to $100 a ton. So, Dave, is the mining sector booming again?
It will do. I think they've gone into a bit of a lockdown. They had to, I guess, protect their interests. They've been able to maintain a running status, keep the I guess the ore or whatever they're processing going. They've effectively been in lockdown to fly in, fly out guys have been having to do longer stints and things like that to keep the mining industry going. So I did read this morning that is starting to open up. I think Rio are starting to look at their fly in, fly out roster, so which is really good news for everyone, really, including the guys that are either stuck on site or stuck in places for extended periods of time. So I think it's definitely starting to open up. But from an iron ore perspective, I don't think they actually stopped producing or lost any sort of massive tons during the COVID. So they've been quite lucky.
Well, Twiggy's doing his best to keep the Chinese buying, I suppose.
Doing very well, isn't he?
Yeah, and now I know, Dave, that a lot of what you do is in base metals, isn't it? Zinc and what have you.
Yeah, we work in a lot of nickel plants, nickel furnaces, produce SO2 gas.
Right.
We're lead zinc in Mount Isa. Yeah, so mainly nickel industries, the sulphuric acid side of things.
And do they? I mean, I haven't got the prices for nickel and zinc, but are they performing well as well?
Oh, nickel's a tough industry for most of the players. It goes up and down, and it's a pretty tough industry. Depending on the processes, a couple of different processes, and some do it a little bit better than others, and some processes are quite difficult and hard on the equipment. So, nickel's a very difficult industry.
But assuming, there's so many things we could talk about. And one of the things is that I know, again, that in your game, regardless of whether there's a virus or not a virus, I mean, the mining plant needs to be refurbished. Otherwise, it becomes dangerous and efficient and all that sort of stuff. I mean, how do you go about, if all of a sudden you get a whole bunch of shutdowns hit your desk, how do you go about recruiting? Do you normally fly in people from other states? Is there a high availability of labour?
Our people are pretty much recruited from around Australia. So depending on we're going to do a shutdown or a maintenance period in WA. We'll fly guys from Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, Tasmania. So that's been probably the most difficult thing that we've had to encounter. Is I guess our staff is Australia wide. Then getting overseas is going to be our next biggest challenge. Fly. We're supposed to be doing a shutdown in Canada in April, so that's.
Mark, do you have you got much involvement in mining services of late?
Not of late, but just in terms of the upkick in iron ore to China, I guess the interesting thing to watch out for will be whether the Chinese impose any interesting and curious customs procedures just to teach us a bit more of a lesson.
Right. I mean, are you seeing that impacting in any of the businesses that you've been working with the last couple of weeks?
Not over the last couple of weeks, no.
Yeah. Okay. What about you, Sarina? Have you got any? I guess because you do a lot for equipment financiers, don't you?
So they're booming at the moment. So one of our clients said they've been in operation for 25 years and they've never been busier. So they quite like COVID, which counterintuitive, but so equipment finance, particularly the heavy equipment finance and mining gear seems to be going back up. And I also think that's probably got to do with as well the government's bringing forward some infrastructure platforms or infrastructure programs. So obviously, if you're bringing forward infrastructure program, equipment's needed for that, and therefore it's all got to get purchased and financed. So I think that's also got something to do with it.
Yeah. So yellow goods.
Yep.
Yeah. You're seeing a bit of that. All right. Okay. Let's just turn over to the next slide. And this is a couple of articles, I think, again, out of today's papers. And if you can't read those. One of them, actually, one of them's from earlier in the week, where it talks about the concern why 63 billion of commercial office loans have bankers worried, and this is the idea that now, because a lot of people a lot of the big firms that have got a lot of floor space in town may be asking the question as to whether or not they need all their people to have their bums on seats in the office all the time, and that's one concern. And then on the other hand, we've got the Reserve Bank urging banks to lend again. And I'm certainly speaking to my finance broker friends. Things are, the banks are obviously very tight. I mean, it's been very hard to get hold of bankers. It's certainly when COVID first hit, because they're busy dealing with all sorts of weird and wonderful requests. And this particular article talks about payment deferrals as being an issue. Mark, you said earlier, obviously you're thinking about what happens in September, because one of the things that happens in September is not only JobKeeper running out, but also those 6-month holidays start running out as well on the lease payments and all that sort of thing.
Exactly right, and they really are that. They're not forgiveness; they are deferrals, and those deferrals are accruing interest, and so it's actually in many cases, exacerbating a problem. Now, that can certainly be worked through if a business at its core is fundamentally viable and can reach some longer term accommodations with financiers. But if there is, something dire or structurally wrong with a business, it's just going to make a bad situation worse.
I mean, actually, I hadn't thought of it. I mean, I guess everybody else has, and it's a double whammy, isn't it? The JobKeeper runs out, and the payments at the bank, as you say, it's a deferral. It's not a forgiveness. It sounds. It sounds like a relationship issue there, but
and just on top of that, most of the rental, the commercial rental deals that are being done at the moment is 50% rebate or 50% deduction and 50% deferral. So a lot of people are going to get hit with that on top of their banking requirements and the deferrals there. So people are sort of thinking that they're going to be fine, but come September, it's going to be a very different story.
Further to that list, the moratoriums in terms of insolvent trading and the moratoriums in terms of serving one etc. All of that comes off in September. So you've got a wave of 4 or 5 different things all sort of hitting in mid to late September.
I wonder, I think Dave's probably thinking he was going to have a sandwich for lunch. He's probably going to get a bottle of grog now. But what?
Red wine.
What?
I don't want to see September.
Yeah. Well, the other side of this article here is about office space. Now, both Douros Jackson and De Vries Taylor, I mean, you're boutique firms, I guess, if I can put it in those terms. But some of your colleagues in those large firms, I mean, without naming names, but obviously, there's some very large law firms and some very large accounting practices around. I wonder how they'd be. I wonder how that. Will they be looking for less space? I mean, how's it going to work?
Well, I know that one large firm in particular has taken 3 less floors, so they've reduced size because they think that that's what's going to be required moving forward. So I think if that's a lead, then it's quite an interesting one. So, and that's 3 floors of office space in Sydney that were full up until the beginning of this year. So I think that the banks probably do have a bit of concern around the commercial office space, but then, there's smaller businesses like ours that we say, we've got our space. Do we need as big? But then the business above us probably move into our space. So it's the top end that I think is of major concern.
Yeah, I'd agree with Sarina. The space that we have in a boutique firm, we're quite generous with our floor space, but that's actually fitted in quite well for COVID requirements in any event. So consequently, we've been able to trade through with a full complement in our firm all the way through and still comply with all the occupational health and safety requirements. So having a bit of extra space is pretty good in the boutique end.
Yeah, I mean, look, our office, we're not, we've resisted the urge to go into the CBD, and we're slightly out of town, and I guess it looks like an act of genius now to be out of there. That's for sure. Okay, look, we've got some other interesting ones. We're going to go a little bit off beam now. What have we got next? Look, this is an interesting one that I just wonder. Just again, this is one for Sarina and Mark. I wonder whether or not the face of, a lot of things, insolvency, restructuring. I mean, this particular article is about class action funders, but there is a lot more litigation funding coming into to insolvency in particular. Is that going to change the way business is done, do you think? I'll start with you, Sarina, maybe.
I think people will be, because it's sort of in turnaround and restructuring and I suppose insolvency, when you're looking at something, you sort of go, oh, no, they're not going to get funded for that, so we can think about this. Or there's that question. Whereas if it becomes a much bigger area, which I think it is, I think they're right, then it's a much different way of looking at how things are handled. So throwing that back over to Mark, so we would sort of say, oh, well, they're not going to get funded to have a look at this claim or that claim, or so it's a different perspective on whether you're looking at it from a turnaround perspective and trying to push someone in, or whether you're actually acting for insolvency practitioners who are then probably going to use some of these funds more.
Yeah,
what do you think, Mark?
They're good comments. I guess my take from that article is about trying to more regulate litigation funders in a licensing regime and make them comply with managed investment scheme legislation. It's interesting that the big listed players in the litigation space have been pushing that for quite a while. And the main reason they're pushing it is to raise the barriers to entry, to try and squeeze out the smaller litigation funders and also the foreign litigation funders that seem to be crossing the border and applying foreign money to litigation in this space. So I actually see a little bit of a danger for my end of restructuring, which is in the SME space. There has been in the last few years a real plethora of nimble and savvy, smaller litigation lenders that I've found very useful. And if this is pushed out to the nth degree, it could squeeze out some of those players in the litigation lending space.
Okay, a couple of questions to ask in closing. So I'll just go around the screen. I'll start with you, Dave. Just looking, we're obviously on a Friday now, but looking forward over the next couple of weeks. You don't have a lot of cases in WA. I mean, you had 5 people in hospital with COVID.
Yeah, WA. I think we've had 1 case in the last couple of weeks. I don't think there's anyone in hospital at the moment. They're down to a few active cases. Queensland is very similar. South Australia, I don't think, has had a case for a couple of weeks now. Northern Territory is pretty good.
You've got to be feeling pretty good about that, surely. That's a bit of optimism right there.
It makes me feel really good. I just would like the premiers to agree on opening borders as soon as
the trouble with them is
I know it's a risk.
Yeah. We should put them on job keeper.
Yeah, look, it's a risk opening borders, and I can see the rationale behind it and protecting their states and people travelling back and forwards. But
I've got an idea for you.
I've got a personal interest in opening borders. So,
well, what we should do is we should say to your premier, either here's a risk. You can either open the border, or we're going to stick you in one of Dave's suits and clean out an asset. Which one of those?
I'll mention it. I'll see if I can catch up with him. Yeah. They've done really well, though. I mean, Australia has done very well in containing this and stopping the spread. So I think we've definitely looks ahead of the rest of the world by the look of it.
Okay, and Sarina, what's something that's sort of keeping you optimistic and keeping your glass half full the next week ahead of us?
I think opening up New South Wales on the 1st of June to non-essential travel, so in other words, holidays coming into the school holidays, is going to be a real boost. I think New South Wales got devastated. I mean, a lot of Australia got devastated by the fires, but particularly, the South Coast and other places, Sapphire Coast. I think it's going to lift spirits. I know people have been talking about that a lot, where they're going to go, what they're going to do. So I think that New South Wales is primed to start feeling a little bit better about itself. Albeit that there were 3 cases overnight that they don't know how they got them. So that's quite interesting to see where that goes. So I think that's something to look forward to.
Okay. I noticed that, childcare centres are going to start opening up as well. So that's going to be helpful. Certainly schools are back and all that sort of stuff. I mean, look, while some of us are sort of on, in the special situations area, I think that we see more activity, not when things are at the bottom, but when things are coming off the bottom. I've always said, it's when things are bouncing back. That's when people, when they've got something in their revenue forecast that they can build a restructuring plan around. It's one thing if it's all gloom and doom, but if you've actually, if you've done it a bit tough, but you've got, you can suddenly maybe put some sales orders or something into that plan, you've then got something to play with. What do you reckon, Mark?
I'm hoping that that burst of optimism, I hope that comes to the fore, and it sort of encourages directors, particularly of SMEs, which is my space, to do a bit more planning, be a bit more rigorous around how they're going to restructure to punch out the other side in September. And I hope they touch on experts such as people such as us, Sarina and you, Nick, and you, David, in terms of getting the right sort of input to get good plans together that will be robust and take them forward beyond September.
Do you think, I was almost going to do a survey of the insolvency industry this week, and I haven't given up on the idea, but one of the things I'm interested in knowing is whether or not they think that, are people, there will be some restructuring on the other side of this. Are we going to be looking at people saying, look, we're going to restructure, but we're going to bat on? Or are they going to be saying, listen, I'm going to call it stumps and, go on?
Well, look, unfortunately, a lot of this free money, in inverted commas, has propped up some zombies, companies that really at their core aren't viable and really should be put to the sword. And so, there will be a flurry of that activity. And I think, if there isn't a core business to be saved, it really is better that they are, wound up and that capital recycled, and made available to businesses that, are viable or can be made viable.
All right. Well, look, on that note, we're just running out of time, and Dave's got to go and catch a plane. So Dave's got one of those golden tickets that lets him fly around the country. So
I'm not sure about that.
So Dave Osman from APMS, thank you very much for joining us. Mark Robinson from DVT and Sarina Jackson from Douros Jackson. It's been a very interesting discussion. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who's watched us live. We've streamed today on LinkedIn and on Facebook, which is a first for us. But thank you to everybody. Most of our listeners and viewers watch us over the weekend. We are a podcast now. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And look forward to catching you. Yep, thank you. And look forward to seeing you all again soon. Cheers.
All right. Thanks, guys. Good to meet you all.